A little-known Daoist text called the Wunengzi is also referred to as Master Incapable. I have not seen a single video online detailing this Daoist text. Now, bear in mind there are many ancient texts that we may not hear about, but this one I find to be quite profound, and I'm actually going to be doing a reading of this text on my channel in full for anybody who's interested. So be sure to follow along on my channel, subscribe if you'd like, like the video if you want to hear more about this, because I have to say, just reading the first book of this section, right, a small little section of this book, I was just amazed at the relevance to what is happening in today's world, because Daoism and Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, the foundations to this philosophy of Daoism in ancient China, talks a lot about how we get out of the warring states and how we get out of this chaos and how we achieve a balance and a unity. Well, we look in the world today and we see a lot of potential chaos, a lot of problems, and we may not know how to navigate it. The Daoists provide us with a very unique perspective that was not mainstream at the time, nor is it mainstream now, but can provide us with great insights shall this information become more mainstream, which is also why I wrote my book, Tao, The Full Return to Nature, which goes over briefly, the whole idea of Daoism and the problem of the ism and the problem of, the identity around it, because there's just a lot of philosophies, there's a lot of philosophers, and even some of these figures in some of these texts we're not entirely sure where they come from or who wrote them. So it's very fascinating to observe Chinese history, especially any ancient history, and I'm glad to share this with you guys. And this is one of the only books online translating this work into English, okay? So it's translated by Jan D. Mayer, okay? And Master Incapable, a medieval Daoist on the liberation of the mind. And now, if you also know my work regarding the American abolitionist and slavery, it's powerful to see that perspective of freedom from ancient times, where slavery was widely known and practiced. So Master Incapable, or the Wunengzi, is an important but relatively little known Daoist work written in 887 as the Tang Dynasty, which was between 618 and 907, was breathing its last. The unknown author, a former government official now living as a recluse, witnesses internecine warfare, widespread poverty, and rampant social injustice, and attempts to explain why humanity seems to be plunging into a state of utter chaos. The nucleus of Master Incapable's analysis is his view of the separation of humanity from the natural world, caused by an abnormal growth of the intellect. His critique is as radical as that in the so-called primitivist chapters of the Daoist classic Zhuangzi, in which civilization is considered a disease spread by an intellectual and societal elite, those who are called sages. The way out of mankind's predicament, he argues, consists in deconstructing conventional wisdom and in ridding oneself of desire and intentionality, thereby finding one's way back to naturalness and effortless action. Fiercely egalitarian in tone, Master Incapable, or the Wunengzi, also criticizes superstition, offers a coherent philosophy of reclusion, and holds highly original views on life and death, and language and intellect in the animal world. As a work of literature, it combines forcefully argued discussions and alternative interpretations on well-known historical episodes with glimpses into the private life of the philosopher, his family members, and entourage. This fully annotated translation also includes an introduction to help explain the unique position the work occupies in the history of Daoism. When compared with the bulk of the Tang Dynasty Daoist literature, Master Incapable immediately stands out, almost entirely free of Buddhist or Confucian influence and not focused at all on the themes ubiquitous in most Tang Daoist texts, such as immortality and how to attain it. Master Incapable takes us straight back to the fountainhead of Daoist thought Indeed, it is in the Taoist classics with Lao Tzu or Dao Di Ching and Light-Tzu and Chuang-Tzu. So as you can tell, the person who translated this book definitely sees a lot of value in the Wunengzi and how it actually, he puts it up there with the Dao Di Ching and the Chuang-Tzu, the main two texts that people would say are the foundational text to Daoism. And he also talks about the idea of translation, and he actually criticizes somebody else who made a translation in their book, Daoism and Anarchism, referring to this text, because there's actually quite a lot of parallels with this idea of anarchy in Daoism, which I also explore in my book, by a lot of people's surprise. And he says, however, there are errors and imprecisions, and that they're frequent, and that the transcription of Chinese names is sloppy and annotation is feeble. So, he's very critical of the other translation. And of course, again, he's highly valuing this book. So it'll be very interesting to go deep into this text and see the value that is within it. Now, let's start to read this book, because the preface will help you understand why the title of this text is Master Incapable, and perhaps a little bit of context as to where this text comes from. Preface. Master Incapable is an intimate friend of mine. At a young age, he was already widely learned and limited in his desires. He excelled in the most thorough study of the cosmic order and of fundamental nature, and thus arrived at an understanding of the heavenly ordained lifespan. During the Huangchao Rebellion, he fled and drifted, never staying long in one place and seemingly indifferent to cold and hunger. In the third year of the Guangqi reign period, the Son of Heaven was in Bao, and in the four directions there were still warfare. Master Incapable lodged in the commoner's house of the Jing family in Zhofu, and concealed himself there. Crude though his common folk lodgings were, he shared in the life there and conformed to it. During the daytime he liked to lie in bed without sleeping. Lying there, he would fill a few sheets of paper with writing. When he got up, he would keep them close to his chest without showing them to me. Between the Renshin day of the second spring month and the Jihai day of the final spring month, he filled a few dozen sheets of paper, which he rolled up and put in a bag. It seemed as though he had written a book. I secretly obtained this book. For the most part, it consists of records of things transmitted or witnessed, and in some cases, conversations he once had with brothers and friends. Its purport is essentially to illuminate the principle of naturalness and explore the boundaries of human nature in the heavenly ordained lifespan. In naturalness, one is without undertaking. Human nature and the heavenly ordained lifespan are free of desire, and therefore Master Incapable neglects the doctrine of the rights and keeps worldly matters at a distance. Those who understand this will put their faith in it without having to rely on further explanations. As to those who do not understand, could they be without blame? I have divided the text and ordered it thematically. A total of 34 chapters has been compiled into 3 books. I share the text with others who understand it. I have closely examined both Master Incapable's actions and his deepest thoughts and feelings. Therefore, I make no mention of his name or his official career. The fault of the sages. Before heaven and earth separated, there was the undivided life force of chaos. The undivided life force overflowed and separated into the 2 principles. There were the pure and the turbid, as well as the light and the heavy. The light and pure rose up, becoming yang in heaven. The heavy and turbid descended, becoming yin and the earth. Heaven, being firm and sturdy, was mobile, while earth, being soft and compliant, was immobile. That was the spontaneous nature of the life force. Once heaven and earth had occupied their positions, the life forces of yin and yang began to interact. Thereupon, the naked creatures, the scaly creatures, the hairy creatures, the feathered creatures, and the shelled creatures came into existence. Humans are the naked creatures. They live together with the scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures. Along with them, they are born from the interacting life forces of heaven and earth, and there is nothing that sets them apart from the others. Now, there are those who claim that there is something which sets them apart. Is it not true that humans call themselves different from the scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures? Are humans not able to make use of intellect and language? But however you look at it, from the birds and the beasts right down to the tiniest of the wriggling worms, all creatures love life and avoid death. They all build their nests and burrows and seek out drink and food. They all raise and nurture their own kind and protect them. In no way do they differ from humans who love life and avoid death, who build houses and habitations, who seek out clothing and food, who raise and nurture sons and daughters and consider them theirs. How can it be claimed that the other creatures lack intellect? From the birds and the beasts right down to the tiniest of wriggling worms, all creatures have their own sounds, whether it be shouts, birdsong, twittering, or buzzing. How do you know that there is no language among them? It is only because humans do not understand these sounds that they claim the animals cannot speak. Furthermore, how do we know that the birds and the beasts, not understanding the language of humans, do not similarly claim mankind to be incapable of speech? The shouting, singing, twittering, or buzzing sounds they make must therefore be considered language. How could one claim them incapable of speech? In the possession of both intellect and language, humans and the other creatures are one. The differences are only in the outward appearance. Now, differences in outward appearance also exist among the scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures. Why then solely insist on their being different from humans? Humans are also different one from another despite similarities in outward appearance, or alike in spite of their differences in outward appearance. Why solely insist on outward differences with regard to the other four kinds of creatures? Heaven and earth are gigantic entities amidst the life forces of yin and yang. In their turn, the five kinds of spirituality potent beings, to wit, the naked, scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures are entities within the gigantic entities as a result of the harmoniously conjoined life forces of these gigantic entities. Compare it to the way rivers and seas enclose fish and turtles, or the way mountains and hills contain grasses and trees. Thus, in earliest iniquity, the naked creatures dwelled together with the scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures in a disorganized fashion. Females and males united spontaneously, without any distinction between man and woman, or husband and spouse, and without any hierarchy between father and son or older and younger brother. In summertime they lived in nests, in wintertime in burrows, and there was no construction of habitations. They devoured other creatures unskinned and drank their blood, and did not eat the 100 grains. After birth they instinctively started to run. At the moment of death they instinctively fell to the ground. No one gave a thought to stealing or murdering, and burials were an unknown custom. They depended on their spontaneous nature and followed their natural authenticity. They were neither controlled nor governed. Simplicity and purity were the ordering principles, and this situation lasted for a long time. Later, among the naked creatures, there were some whose intellect grew to be more rampant. They were called humans. By means of laws, they restricted the scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures. They also taught each other how to sow and plant in order to eat the 100 grains, and thereupon plows began to be used. They joined pieces of wood together and mixed mud so as to build habitations. and thereupon mattocks and axes were put to work. They established marriage, thereby separating women and men, and consequently there was a distinction between husband and wife and a ranking of father and son and older and younger brother. Inner and outer coffins, clothing, and shrouds were made to bury the dead, and thereupon the ritual observances connected with burial came into being. They knotted snares and nets so as to capture the scaly, hairy, feathered, and shelled creatures, and thereupon a taste for the knife and sacrificial meat tray appeared. Because of this, simplicity and purity faded, and emotions and intentions arose. However, creatures were still spontaneously strong or weak without anything being controlled. Those whose intellect had grown most profusely selected one of their own to govern the masses. They named this individual the ruler, and they named the masses subjects. This individual was allowed to treat the masses as serfs, while the masses were not allowed to confront the individual. Thereupon there was the division between ruler and subject, and the segmentation between venerable and lowly. The venerable one is prominent, while the masses are all identical. In the descent to later generations, ranks of nobility and official salaries were implemented to promote or demote the masses. Thereupon one used things according to the classification of noble and humble, and one satisfied one's desires according to the difference between poor and rich. Consequently, those whose intellect had increased most profusely were called sages. Shortly after that, the humble became jealous of the noble, and the poor became jealous of the rich. And so, the quarrelsome human mind arose. Those called sages were concerned by this and consulted with one another. At first, these creatures were simple and pure. Who called them humans? We forcibly named them humans, whereupon they were separated from the other creatures. At first, among these creatures, no one was humble or venerable. Who called them ruler or subject? We forcibly established this, and since then we have had rulers and subjects. At first, capturing and desiring were unknown to these creatures. Where did the ranks of nobility and official salaries come from? We forced classifications upon them, and since then there is honor and disgrace. The result is that now we have watered down authenticity and purity, and intensified cravings and desires so that they harbor quarrelsome minds. The quarrelsome will take by force, and taking by force leads to disorder. What should we do? Those whose intellect had grown even more profusely said, "We have techniques for that." Whereupon they established the teachings of humaneness, dutifulness, wholeheartedness, and trustworthiness, and standards for ritual and music in order to restrain them. A ruler causing suffering to his subjects is called pitiless, and subjects attacking their ruler are called rebels. A father who is not fond of his son is called unkind, and a son who does not respect his father is called lacking in filial devotion. Older and younger brothers who do not get along are called lacking in friendship and brotherly love, and a husband and wife without unity are called lacking in chastity and harmony. Those who behave like this are considered wrong, and those who do not behave like this are considered right. If one is right, one is honored, and if one is wrong, one is dishonored. This then gave rise to a mentality of pleasure in what is right and shame in what is wrong, and so the quarrelsome mind was suppressed. In the descent to later times, cravings and desires blazed up even higher, whereupon humans turned their back on humaneness, dutifulness, wholeheartedness, and trustworthiness, transgressed ritual and music, and began to fight. Those called sages regretted this and saw no other option but to establish laws of corporal punishment and armaments as a means of control. For minor crimes, there was corporal punishment, and for major crimes, weapons were used. Thereupon the states were filled with crimes punished by restraining ropes, shackles and manacles, whips and bamboo canes, and banishment and exile, and the empire was filled with punitive expeditions and the use of swords, spears, bows, and arrows. Families were disrupted and states overthrown continuously. The people lived in dire straits and poverty, and the misery of premature deaths extended endlessly. Alas, naturalness is now for animals, and an absence of naturalness is for humans. They forcibly impose habitations, drink, and food, which leads to desire. They forcibly divide the noble and humble, venerable and lowly, provoking struggles between humans. They forcibly implement humaneness, dutifulness, rituals, and music, overturning man's authenticity. They forcibly carry out criminal law and engage in punitive expeditions, destroying human lives. This causes people to pursue what is not essential and to forget what is fundamental, which complicates the emotions and shortens the lifespan. Misled and deluded, they cause deaths, and a return to the past is now impossible. This is the fault of those called sages. So there you have it, the first chapter of Book 1 in the Wunengzi. That right there, if you ask me, is quite powerful.